people who haven't heard much about these, can you give us an overview of how these contracts work and what they can be used for related to digital resources?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Fallon. I'm the Executive Director of SETDA. I represent state educational technology directors and digital learning leaders across our country. And we also represent U.S. territories and the Department of Defense schools that are around the world. In simple terms, contract agreements are like bulk deals. So if you go to Costco or Sam's Club, they're already negotiated a pretty good price for you. And what they do is they allow you to buy in bulk and everything else. So it's like buying a big pack of snacks. And those contracts are like snack packs. You're just going in there and grabbing them. So in the simple layman kind of terms, how they work. So instead of each school or district negotiating separate deals with different companies and doing it one-on-one for resources like ebooks or educational software or student information systems, online courses, the state does it all in one go. And it really means that there's more bargaining power because they're buying for lots of students. It doesn't mean that you have to buy, off that contract, but the state's already done all of the work for you in terms of trying to bring together the power of group bargaining. The other thing is cost savings. Because you're buying in such large quantities, you often get a better price per student than if you were to negotiate it on your own. In terms of standardization, these contracts almost standardize some of the materials used across the state so that all the students in the state then would get access to the same high quality digital resources. And this can help ensure some fairness and equitability and consistency in the education system in that state. And often the materials are aligned to state standards so that saves some time and work for teachers. The other thing is, we know procurement can be a really lengthy process. This actually helps streamline some of that. It allows the vetting process, the piloting, buying the digital thing. They just have to simply use what was reviewed and already negotiated in the state contract. So in short, it's really just easier and more cost effective for schools to get digital resources for their students. And that way it just shortens the time and it's almost like more hands make light work. It's in essence, it's kind of in that spirit.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that overview. That's a lot of benefits, and I'm looking forward to unpacking how those actually work at the state level. So I'll turn to Rick, Vanessa, and Janie. Talk to us a little bit about why your respective states decided to go this route of state procurement as opposed to just letting districts kind of go it on their own and pick out things independently.
Well, thank you, Amy. I can jump in. This is Rick Gaseford, Utah State Board of Education. I'm the Education Technology Specialist and have worked with our state network, the Utah Education and Telehealth Network, and doing just exactly this kind of work. Our legislature, being a state that's large in geography and smaller in population, and not a wealthy state, I guess you would say. We look at these kinds of opportunities. One is to save. Number one for policymakers is to save taxpayer dollars, but it's also to get economies of scale. We all know that typically software is purchased by how many licenses that you may be purchasing in that. And if you buy 100, that you're going to get one price. And if you buy 10,000, it's going to be a completely different price. And if you buy 500,000 of those licenses, well, that's going to be even. And that, so you can sort of see how these economies of scale work. And that has been the goal of our state, is to try to capture those economies of scale. It's also a way, I think, one of the reasons that we've gone down this pathway is to provide equity of resources, that no matter where a student is at in Utah, whether they are in a school in the metropolitan area of Salt Lake City, or they're in one of our most remote districts, hours away from Salt Lake City, that the students in either school will have access to the same kinds of learning resources. And that's been really important. One of the important reasons that we go down and we look at this. But I think it's also, and one of the challenges, of doing this is that it's great to be able to talk about economies of scale. It's great to be able to talk about saving taxpayers' dollars, but it does take funding to be able to execute these kinds of agreements and that. And so it's working with policymakers also to understand the importance of these resources and how we can actually license the entire state versus just a few districts in the state. And so that's a continual challenge.
I'll jump in next. Hello, everyone. I'm Vanessa Wren, Chief Information Officer for the State Department of Instruction in North Carolina. Just echoing a lot of what Julia and Rick shared. For North Carolina, it certainly began with the vision many years ago around how do we move en masse the state forward around digital learning. How do we move our students' engagement and our teachers' access to standardized resources? So certainly I would say that it definitely has to start with that vision, but it also levels the playing field for our students and our teachers, no matter where in the state that they may teach or where any student may live, they are going to get access to a certain level of resources. And it's also, and this really played out during the pandemic, it minimizes the number of tools that our students have to learn and minimizes the number of tools that our parents have to learn how to navigate. So that gives you buy-in and gets you off the ground very quickly when you're doing that. But certainly it's also responsible to our taxpayers. We are able to negotiate better pricing en masse than our individual school districts can do. Our school districts range in size from 180,000 students to our smallest school district at 435 students out in the Cape Hatteras area of North Carolina. And so certainly when we are able to leverage our mass 1.5 million student population, we are able to negotiate better contract terms. But we're also able to ensure proper data privacy, proper security with the tools, and then interoperability. So everything that we said before about economies of scale, but then those pieces as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Janie, is that similar to Nevada's rationale, or would you add anything to that?
Yes. Hi, good morning, everybody. Janie Morney from Nevada Department of Education. Very similar, especially, thinking about equitable access to resources and support. The one thing I would add to is in this day where we know education and the field of education is getting more and more difficult to attract individuals to want to participate in the field. This having statewide contracts where we have access, where all teachers have access to it without the fear of it going away or of a district not rebuying, essentially, can help with that vacancy issue that we have as a tremendous challenge currently in Nevada. Like Rick had stated, Nevada is also very geographically large, population small, and we have population dense centers, right? So we have a school district in Clark County that's the 5th largest in the nation, next to one of the smallest districts, I think, in the nation that only has 75 students total. And so this just allows for all access.
Gotcha. Thank you. Those are some really compelling reasons, I think, especially these points about saving taxpayer dollars and being efficient with resources. We know, states have been flush with ESSER funds in recent years, but those are coming to an end. So thinking about sustainability of resources and the best cost over time is certainly important, now more so than ever. And there's a lot of different types of tools that states can have on a statewide contract agreement. Let's start with Vanessa this time and think about what are the different things that North Carolina has a statewide contract agreement for in this digital educational resource space?
So in North Carolina, one of the things I always talk about is about a third of our tech directors have 3 years or less of experience. So we've had a great resignation. So the contract and the managed services that we're able to provide certainly is a service model for our schools. We are providing for our schools and students identity access management, broadband. We have fiber in every school that we manage here at the state level and provide through that. Cybersecurity services such as firewall, endpoint management, and active threat detection. We provide a convenience contract for our learning management system. And we have out of 115 of our state LEAs, 113 are on that state LMS. So a lot of buy-in with that. Certainly we have a state student information system, an instructional improvement system. And then there's things around professional development that we feel like there has to be some standardization around. So we provide memberships to ITSE and COSIN across the state for all of our teachers and for all of our technology and digital workers in the field. and convenience contracts for student devices and digital resources.
Can you tell us a little bit more? What's the difference when you say convenience contract? What does that mean, and what are some of the other types?
Well, certainly a convenience contract is one where we have gone through the IT procurement process, and that might vary a little bit by state, but that is where we're looking at state procurement guidelines, and we will do a request for proposals and have a lot of market analysis and then subject matter expert on what the specifications should be, and then negotiate a contract and the pricing and the delivery and the SLA terms that anyone in our state, in our school systems can purchase off of. And so when they can just get a quote against that contract, because all the heavy lifting has been done behind the scenes. And that includes, and this is what's really hard on some of our districts, that includes the architecture review, the interoperability reviews, and the security data privacy reviews within that contract.
I gotcha. And that would be hugely helpful given, as you said, so many of the ed tech directors are new in their seats, or I would imagine in smaller or rural districts are probably wearing a whole lot of hats and might not have capacity to do that deep dive. Let's go to Janie and then Rick. Talk to us a little bit about, are you using the same tools as North Carolina? Are you doing this for broadband, a learning management system, software? What are the types of tools that you have contract agreements for?
Yeah, very similar in Nevada, learning management system as well as a student information system. Broadband, we do work in collaboration with other state offices to help ensure that broadband is accessible around our state. And it needs to sometimes look in different fashions just because of the geography of our state. It is not easy to access broadband in some areas, but very similar to what Vanessa had stated as far as the access and what we do at the state level procurement avenue.
And I echo what both of them have already said. We in Utah we have procured things at the state level, particularly even before the pandemic, and that we had procured an LMS system for the state, and like North Carolina, the vast majority of our districts and schools are all using that. And then we also use this for telecommunications, particularly for the broadband network, because we have a single education broadband network for the state that is a public-private partnership where we oftentimes come in to be able to provide broadband to schools. And to be able to provide robust connectivity to our schools, no matter where they are at, with the goal of being at least a 1 gigabit circuit to every school in the state. And we have lots and lots of schools that are far beyond that, sometimes 10 gigabit or more at school. But we're able to do that because being that public-private partnership and an E-rate consortia applicant, we're able to then leverage the cost and be able to get far more. And so we have a very robust network connectivity on the broadband network across the state. Software programs like an LMS, we felt were very important. During the pandemic, we found out that we've got all these kids at home, and we've got teachers that have the LMS and they have connectivity, and they've got students, but how do you better engage those students? So we actually did it's one of those times where we moved a product from one tier to another, because we felt it was really helpful to have a product like Nearpod to be able to help engage students. The State Board of Education also saw some tools and was able to procure some things, for the state as well. But one of the things that came up during all of this was there's hundreds of products, literally hundreds, if not thousands of products that are being used every day in our school systems. Is it possible? And it's not possible to have a contract for every one of those. And so how do you do this? I mean, you have very limited staff, you can't be procuring everything for everyone. And so our state network and State Board of Education, we worked collaboratively to come up with a process that would help us to be able to identify products. And we sort of identified 4 levels of products in that. And you have those products that are just institution level. They're made for, institution needs it and they're going to get it and they're paid by the institution. And we don't really have any kind of software agreements for those. But then we have products that sort of move up the scale on that. And what we call those are goodwill products, where maybe half the districts or schools are beginning to use those. Could we come in at that point and negotiate a pricing agreement? Maybe not to the level of a full contract for everybody in the state, but at least be able to say, have a central entity that can do the purchasing. And our state network is in code, is able to procure on behalf of the districts and schools in the state, and then can actually bill them for those products and that. But we've had multiple products where we have 50% of the districts or more, they're all paying, the rack rate, basically, and been able to reduce those costs significantly. And then there does come a time when we start looking at those products that are what we call common good products. And those common good products, it just makes sense to then go back to the legislature and say, we all need to have these kinds of products, or this type of product. And then we get the legislature to appropriate additional funding, ongoing funding, so that we can be able to procure that in behalf of every school and district in the state. Canvas is our LMS system, it's probably one of the big examples of that, but also Nearpod. We have products like, another product like Derivative, which sits in that goodwill product. And then we have others and we also have one other thing that we've done in Utah. And it's sort of, and it's one of those where at a state process, it takes time. And sometimes districts want to be able to move faster than that. And so what we've done is we've been able to work with, we have a large district that may start the process working with on a particular product, and then invite other districts to join in on that contract. That has been another way to be able to really leverage the economy, give the economies of scale and leverage the power of multiple districts, but be able to help both large and small.
Gotcha. Rick, thank you. I think that's helpful to think through the different paths that states could take on this, that it doesn't have to be all state all the time on every potential product. I'll save most questions for the end, but we got a question I think y'all could answer pretty quickly. Do you require all districts to use the same student information system in your state, or are there several options and they can pick and choose? Vanessa, it sounds like you all have at least one option that almost everybody uses, but there is some flexibility. Is that right?
For the state information system, there is no option. That is part of our uniform reporting system. And so for uniform data, so we use one student information system. But for our learning management system, that is one where we provide that as an option. But because we're able to negotiate such good terms at the state level, it's an option that most of our schools want to use. And also just when we are looking at how we select the product, statewide buy-in and statewide input, and that makes it easier. We're selecting the products that meet the needs of our folks out in the field, and we're able to right size at our level, right? We're not having to, districts aren't having to buy more licenses than they need, because we're buying them here and we can manage them at a higher level.
Gotcha. Janie, same question.
Yeah, almost exactly the same. The SIS system is one system and it is uniform, again, for the same reasons that Vanessa had mentioned. For our statewide learning management system, it is also an option. We do have 16 out of our 17 districts that do use it, and all of our charter schools have opted in for that. And so that piece of really getting statewide buy-in, district buy-in, and educator buy-in, sometimes it is a grassroots effort, to be honest. Our learning management system was a grassroots effort. It was teachers really pulling together saying, hey, we really do need this. And then the pandemic really helped push that right to the surface. But we right, like as in most states, local control. And so we do try to provide the support for districts to make that choice. Sometimes we help make that choice a little bit more rosy on one side versus the other. But very similar to North Carolina.
Gotcha. And Rick, does it look the same for you guys?
No, we're the outlier. So we do not have a state SIS system. We have one that schools can use that was developed in-house. years ago, and a lot of our charter schools and some of our smaller districts use that. Most of our other districts, it's either they have purchased a product, such as Power School, or to be their SIS system. Skyward is another one that's been used, and there's a number of those systems that are out there. Several of our larger districts also have their own computer programming department, and have developed their own programs that meet very much their local needs, and they have no desire to go out and to purchase another product, nor to be forced to be able to use those products. So the challenge then becomes, okay, so what does that mean for the state? Would the state like to have everybody on the same SIS for the exact same reasons that North Carolina and Nevada mentioned? Yes, they would, but that's just not going to be possible. So they have to be able to work with those various systems to be able to make sure that the data can be brought in and can be brought into our state longitudinal data system.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's helpful to hear, just the very different state approaches here. Julia, I know that Vanessa, Janie, and Rick talked about a number of different potential uses of statewide contract agreements for purchasing different types of items or services. What do you see nationally in terms of trends on what these contracts are most often used for?
Well, we've talked about digital curriculum resources and using statewide contracts to purchase those. Some states are using them to actually provide professional development for opportunities for educators, whether it's built into a product's contract or it's a standalone. It's literally trying to make sure that we can enhance teachers' digital literacy instructional skills and offering professional learning through there. We also see it through special education and accessibility tools. So ensuring that there's accessibility and support for students with special needs is a growing trend. And states are using the contract to secure specialized digital resources, right, and assistive technology tools to make learning more inclusive. We've talked a little bit about learning management systems and those types of systems that help people manage online classes, assignments, student progress, tracking, and whatnot. We also see some states using it to incorporate OER into their statewide contracts. And these are freely available digital materials that can help reduce the cost of educational resources while maintaining high quality. And then, of course, the hot topic that we talk about often in our SETDA circles, cybersecurity and privacy, baking in the importance of data security and student privacy into contracts to ensure that resources meet the stringent sort of cybersecurity and privacy standards that we have out there.
Perfect. And let's build on that. In order for states to get the most benefit out of these agreements, they need to kind of carefully build in specific requirements and specifications into either their request for information or their request for proposals from the different vendors. What should they be making sure that they include for different types of digital educational resources?
I feel like this is the things that we all hold dear in the ed tech spaces. Again, it's really interoperability. I know Vanessa mentioned it, but the systems should be able to be compatible with states' existing data systems and learning management systems. You want to request information on the standards. What standards are they using? What standards body from the vendor that supports for interoperability, and how those products can integrate with other ed tech technologies used by the state or the district. Again, data privacy and cybersecurity, it is utmost right now. It's like almost a non-negotiable. You have to be addressing this. You want to be requesting details on the vendors, how they protect student educator data, you want to ask them how they comply with the relevant state and federal privacy laws, such as FERPA and COPA. And also ask for information on the vendor's data encryption methods, access controls, and most importantly, incident response plans. What are they going to do if something happens? How is that going to be handled? Accessibility, inclusivity, again, is the materials, and you can bake it into a statewide contract. Is it accessible to all students, including those with disabilities? Is it in compliance with accessibility standards like Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the WCAG? I don't know if there's a way to say that appropriately. And then also, you want to inquire about the vendor's commitment to inclusive design and accessibility testing. Are they doing that from the get-go? Is it not an afterthought? Nothing works if you don't have professional development. And I think that's the first thing off the chopping block that we often see. but you want to be asking the vendors to describe the support and the training they'll be providing to the IT staff, and not just about how to use the software or the device that you're buying. It's how are you going to use it in the context that it's going to be used, either for business operations or it's going to be used for instructional practices. And then you want to also request information on the availability of user guides, tutorials, and ongoing professional learning, so that it's one thing to get it and get up and started, but then you start to move through the process and you might need some more additional professional learning to be able to use the product to its fullest. And then we want to know about data ownership and portability. So you want to be really sure that you clarify who owns the data rights, and if you need to port that data to somewhere else, does the state retain control over its own data? So that's really important. So I would say that those are the things from a sort of a technology lens to make sure you want to be baking into your state contracts.
And I think that emphasizes so much the importance of expertise in building out these contracts and these requests for information and proposals. The things that you talked about, I imagine, at the state level, you'd want to be talking to your state technology office. You'd want to be talking to people who have expertise in this field, that maybe if I'm in any school district, let alone a small one, I might not have that resource on hand, that kind of expertise that I can just turn to, in the next office over or something like that. So with that perspective of getting these contracts or these requests for information built at the state level, I'd love to know more about like the nuts and bolts of how the state staff with us today have implemented these contracts, what that looked like, communicating with other agencies, communicating with districts and vendors. Vanessa, can you start telling us how that looked in North Carolina, and we'll go from there?
Absolutely. You will have a very rotten RFP or RFI if you do not start with adequate market analysis and requirements gathering. If you are putting in place a convenience contract or a managed service at the state level, that's something that you want all educators to use, then you need to go out and talk to the educators. Every person has an opinion of what they need something to look like and what they need it to do for them. And so the requirements gathering is so critical, and understanding the language. And sometimes one of the things, from a technical standpoint, your language might not mesh with the language of a third grade teacher. So being able to go and with those subject matter experts who are going to end up using this, take what they need it to do and translate that into a technical language, that's going to give you the right requirements gathering. And then, market analysis is tremendous. You got to understand what you need it to do. And you might do a market analysis and come to the conclusion there's not anything out there. So, I know we are so focused on low code and no code these days and COTS products, but there's still a place in our lives for some customized solutions as well. So that might lead you there. But I would just say a very strong market analysis as a beginning step, and input from all your stakeholders, and communication of the roadmap, the purpose, and the timeline. You don't want any surprises for folks. You want to let them know what the end goal is, and showing them that there's sustained funding. Every teacher will say, yeah, we've done this before. Remember Race to the Top, and I had it for 2 years, and I'm not going to train and learn it if I know it's not going to be here. So making sure you've clearly communicated the sustainability portion as well.
Gotcha. Rick, I'll go to you because I know Utah has had sustained funding on this, on many digital issues, really. Talk to us a little bit about what this looked like in Utah. What other agencies did you speak with? How did you coordinate with districts and vendors, that sort of thing?
Yes, a few things. I'll highlight it with an example here. A couple of years ago, and it's just going into place this year, but it was a 2-year process almost we were looking at filtering, which is not a sexy subject at all. No pun intended there, but it's just not one of those things that's everybody wanted to talk about. But we also knew that since the last time we did a contract, our contract was coming due. Since the last time that we did that contract, a lot had changed on the internet. And so going back to what Vanessa said is important. You got to do a market analysis. And so we actually opted to do an RFI first and put it out there, what we were looking for, and then let companies respond back to it so that we could actually take the time in an RFI procedure that would help us to inform what the RFP would look like. we didn't want to be going out asking for things that were not possible. We didn't want, but we also wanted to find out what things were out there that we didn't know about that we maybe would like to, see and make sure that those are put into our, into the that RFP process. So through that RFI process, we had numerous vendors that responded to that, and then we, through bringing a committee of tech directors and that together, took those products, basically on that test drive. Do they do what they say they're going to do, and how easy is it to be able to do those kinds of things? It greatly informed the RFP process, which then followed, and then eventually ended up in a multi award of 3 different companies being able to provide filtering for our districts. The filtering option is not filtering is not an option, is what I wanted to say. Everybody has to do it. And where our state network is also the ISP for all of our schools, they have to make sure that everybody has it. Otherwise, they can't, be an E-rate consortia applicant in behalf of all of the school districts. So that's it. That's exactly, one example of that. Cybersecurity tools are right now sort of the 2 hot areas, and a couple of examples of that. One, I sort of alluded to this, one of my earlier responses. We have a district that they needed to have some tools from Google, because we have a lot of districts that, like you, that have thousands and thousands of Chromebooks, and they need the management tools, and Google has tiered access to their tools, and they needed to have the highest level access, the enterprise access to all of the tools. This is one of our largest districts. They thought, well, geez, we got other districts that need to have the same thing. They're in the same boat that we're in. They opened that up to other districts in that. And so they were able to then go through in a much faster process. They knew exactly what they wanted, and be able to procure those tools and be able to, again, offer those economies of scale that a large consortia could do, and particularly a large district that we had, that get better pricing for everyone. And I think, and then another example that came up is, many of you have regional education service agencies. Ours are all tech hubs, are for they become tech hubs. And so what they're doing is going out and procuring some additional cybersecurity tools that they need for network monitoring, but looking at things differently, that knowing that it's one thing to buy a tool, it's another thing to have the tool used. And they didn't want to go out and buy some new tech tools and not have, the tech directors be able to actually use them, particularly in our smallest districts, where the tech director is the tech director, the assessment director, the data privacy officer, and about 18 other jobs. And oh yes, and by the way, you need to go into this tool and look at it every day. So we're now looking at, can we find tools that, have, some artificial intelligence built into them that are monitoring things and then alert us as we need to, as needed in that, instead of putting additional workload on our workers in that.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's really helpful to know about the kind of the back and forth engagement with both the vendor and the district. Janie, do you want to add anything about stakeholder engagement in Nevada?
Absolutely. So I would just say too, including all educational partners at the very beginning is critical for success. It is, I cannot emphasize that enough. And voices matter. And I would say voices matter down to the students. So think about the audience of who is going to be actually using the vendors and the products at any and all level, and that we want to make sure that we're including those voices and decisions. One, that's going to help not only for the procurement process, but really that's going to be a main support piece for sustainability. I can't tell you how often I hear when we talk to anybody in education, oh, just wait around a year, it will be gone, right? And so when we think about how we're rolling things out, and if we're using taxpayer dollars and we're really going back to our legislature saying, hey, this is effective, this is going to level the playing field, this is going to help attract educators, this is going to increase student achievement, right? We want to be able to say it is doing all of that for all across the state. And so really engaging all educational partners is critical. And it's critical at the beginning for sure, but it's something that has to be an ongoing process, right? So building task force or work groups around the different types of products of what you're doing, initiatives that are rolling out, is also going to be something that needs to be continued and needs to be a continued effort, because especially in the digital world, it changes, if not hourly, sometimes daily, right? It is a constant new. And so we want to make sure that we have voices in the room that are pertinent to how it's going to actually help the field and help all do their job better, right? The bottom line is then I always say, like, my job is to help teachers be better teachers and help our kids learn more. And so what it is and how to do that, we need to find whatever tool we can to do that, to help them, right? We have a teacher issue. We don't have enough teachers in my state, and I believe that's in some states as well across our country. So we need to think about how we're going to entice individuals into the education field, as well as then how are they going to stay? Why are they going to stay? The job needs to change. The job is changing. Education is changing. The world is changing. And we have to be really cognitive of that as we think about digital contracts and the contracts that we're doing for digital teaching and learning, because, oh my gosh, right, you can wake up tomorrow and it's a new game. And so staying in that constant contact and really talking to your educational partners, down to your pre-K kiddo, to your neighbor who might be 85 years old, it is all critical that we are involved. Building statewide contracts, we have seen in Nevada, is we're actually now growing professional learning networks. And this is a great opportunity for all teachers now to help teachers. And I think with the influx of really the digital tools, we can now build a network that's nationally, globally, versus staying in that little small pocket of your LEA. So the potential is astronomical of what we can do. We just need to really help and change mindsets to get there.
Awesome. And I'll stay with you on this topic. I've heard each of you say in some way that A, this is a really complicated process, and B, it's only worth it if people actually use the tools. So I'm curious what results y'all have seen so far for students or teachers, whether it's an uptake rate or some other metric that you might have. Is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, are we getting what we hope to see out of this? So I'll stay with you for a moment, Janie.
Yeah. So you know what, and to be transparent, especially when we brought on board a statewide learning management system, because it is essentially an opt-in, you know, it was a minute, and it was sometimes me traveling to each district, hopping in on conversations with district cabinet members and stating the why this is going to be beneficial for your district to participate in, and really so that they could see what could happen. And you have to be willing. And I think, and when we're doing statewide contracts as well, there has to be somebody too at the state that does own it, right? Your districts have to know that they are in support, that there's somebody that they can go to for help, and that they're just not going to be left out on the island. I cannot emphasize enough professional learning. And so for some reason, we have a tendency to make that the first thing that goes, like, oh, that's not necessary. And honestly, that's the one thing I fight for the most. It is critical that we do professional learning. And we don't honestly do enough of it. And we always need to do more of it to really help all of our educational partners in this field. How I know it's successful, I'll tell a quick story. So last year, we actually, because of our statewide learning management system and our ability, and we're actually building our own courses, and really integrating OER for districts so that we can start leveraging funding and other means. We actually had a student who is in an alternative school. He wasn't going to be able to graduate because of our statewide learning management system and the course that we have for this student. You know, he was able to graduate. So we could help one kid, and it was one kid. And we helped this one kid who was in a very, very secure setting, right? Who didn't have access to anything, but we could help him get the one class that he needs to graduate high school. And hopefully, right, that can help him make better decisions as he moves forward in his life. And if we can help one student at a time, if we help one student and then we can help more, then that to me is success. We are helping all of our students become successful, and then they can help, and we can provide them the tools to make those decisions to be the most productive member of their community. And that for me is success. And if it takes me one kid at a time for the next 12 years until I can retire, then that's what I'm going to do, because that's why I'm here. That is why I do this work. And that it wouldn't happen if we didn't actually have our learning management system. So it's very cool.
And that's a really good point, that this isn't technology for technology's sake. It's technology for what it enables for students.
It is absolutely not technology for technology's sake. In the age of 2023 and now beyond, if individuals are fighting technology, I would almost question their ability to be in education anymore, right? There isn't anything that none of us do without technology. And if we're not really integrating technology, it's not about saying, oh, well, they take notes on their Chromebook. Okay. So it's not about replacing a tool for a tool. It's really about enhancing learning and how that learning is going to help them benefit. There isn't a job out there that is not going to use technology. And so it is our duty, our responsibility to ensure that we are doing that and doing that well.
And Vanessa, I know that's something that North Carolina has thought about, of how to build these tools into your longer term digital teaching and learning plan. So tell us, what are some of the results you've seen, whether it's uptake or cost savings or student outcomes? What kinds of effects have you seen?
Well, I'll just start with it's absolutely worth it. And everything Janie just said, it totally aligns with what we've experienced in North Carolina. Certainly, we have the North Carolina Digital Learning Plan that is a growth continuum. We would never be where we are in North Carolina. And I would say that we probably rank it in the top 5 at least on digital age adoption and what our students are able to do, because of how we've been able to use that as a framework. Where are you at? And by providing all the tools, that's one less thing. Then you can focus on the pedagogy. You can focus, right? We're already providing standards aligned tools. So when a teacher comes in, or a principal or administrator, or even a tech director, they can go about the work of student outcomes. They can go about the work of keep creating healthy teachers who can do their job, because some of this heavy lifting has already happened in the background. And so then you can focus on what's important, and that is the student outcomes. And so certainly we've seen, 100% adoption on most of the tools that we're providing that align with our digital learning plan. Certainly the pandemic put an emphasis on that. We could have never transitioned as a whole state almost overnight to remote learning if we did not have a learning management system with content in it already ready to go, and an identity access management platform that parents already knew how to log into, students already knew how to log into. So that's a critical piece, but absolutely worth it. We are saving so much money and cost avoidance at the local school level, which then lets you focus on what's important. And again, that's where the students are. And you've heard me say that, we've leveled the playing field throughout our state. If you're economically depressed, or if you're the most wealthiest district in the state, you have equal access to the tools that you need to focus on health and learning.
Wonderful. And Rick, we've got you back. You scared me for a second there, but you're with us. The question was about any positive results or outcomes you've seen from these contracts in Utah.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what happened. I will figure that out after. But it's a good thing I had a second device sitting here. So, because the other one is still not there. The IT department and I will be having a chat. So, positive outcomes. Yes, but we have been able to go back to our oftentimes the legislature will ask about, economies of scale. Are those really real? And we were able to go back and say, what we procured our LMS for is probably half of what it would have cost if every district had gone out there if you took their discounted rate of, how many students and that they had, and you added all that up, we were probably getting it for about half what they were getting it, what it would have cost them to do it. That's real savings. That's money that they can be able to use for other things. And I think that, as Vanessa mentioned, it allows, by doing that, by providing these kinds of tools and resources, and that allows them then to not have to be so focused on all of this, but be able to focus on the learning outcomes of students. And I think that that's most important. I think, from, the story side of thing, I think what you have to look at is, it's that student that is sitting in a remote school somewhere in your state. And I know all states have, those kinds of smaller rural areas. We maybe go a little further and have what we call frontier areas where, there's just nothing there except maybe the school. But you have to think about that, the student in that school. do they have access to the same resources that the student in, in a large urban high school or elementary school in the, in the Salt Lake City metropolitan area has access to? And then that becomes, and when you see that happening, that's rewarding. And we see that all the time. But it's also, when we're able to do this, we're able to also these kinds of, doing these kinds of state contracts and, and being able to do those things, it allows the tech director to be able to do other things. They can't do all of these things. For many of our, smallest districts, they have a superintendent, they have a business manager, an office, assistant, and a tech director. That's it. That's the whole staff. And they have to do RFPs and RFIs, and they've got to do it for all of these different projects. It won't happen. It just becomes overwhelming. And so again, I think being able to lighten the load and be able to, again, provide quality at less cost or at no cost to them, which is, one of the, things that we've been able to do, particularly on the, the access side of internet, being able to do that as a statewide network. We're able to, schools don't have to pay for their internet access. That's all included in that consortium application that we're doing, and the way that we're able to negotiate pricing for every school in the state.
Awesome. Thank you. And Julia, I know that for folks who are listening who might want to have more resources or more information, that SETDA has some case studies and some other tools available. Can you tell us a little bit about what those options look like? And then Christina can put the links in the chat while you talk about them.
Sure, certainly. So we have a few resources. Now I'm going to preface this that we last did these in 2019. And of course we had a little event that happened between now and then. But the idea is that we have something called Navigating the Digital Shift. And that is a publication that highlights how states are supporting the transformation of personalized learning through these types of efforts in terms of procurement and everything else. And we also have from 2019 a state K-12 instructional materials sort of trends snapshot. At least you can see where we started. We know that there's multiple states that have come on board since the pandemic, and we are looking at updating both of these reports. And that just highlights just state policies and practices in the implementation and selection of digital instructional materials. And then the thing that is totally current, because it's literally current as of like 2 weeks ago, our state trends report is out. Now, while it's not specifically in relation to state contracts or to procurement processes, it is around what state agencies are looking at when it's related to technology and education. And we just released our 2023 report about 2 weeks ago, like I said. So you can check those out. All of those things, though, that are in that report are things that we hold dear. Again, it's the cybersecurity and whatnot, and where you can see state agencies are looking and possibly where they might be looking to do contracts in the future.
Perfect. Thank you. And ExcelinEd also published some resources this week related to this topic. One is a policy brief looking at different ways that states have used statewide contract agreements for digital tools. And we also have a model policy. Obviously, this is something that a state education agency could take up on its own and work with a state procurement office. But it's also something that could have legislative support behind it to support that collaboration and maybe even provide funding for some of these more sustainable resources, as folks have mentioned today. So those are both available on our website as well. And before we close out, I'd like to give each of you a moment to just share your words of wisdom. If someone's listening to this and says, that's great, I want to save money, I want to have more equity for students across my state, I want to have the best tools that are secure and interoperable, where do they begin? What are some words of wisdom that you wish you'd known before you got started? And y'all can take that in any order as things come to mind.
Well, I'll jump in on that one because it comes to mind immediately. Relationships, right? That's so important. You have to have partners to make all this happen. If it's your central IT, your schools, you are folks who are going to help you manage some of these things that we're talking about. So make sure you're establishing those relationships. That also ties into sustained funding. That's relationships to your General Assembly, because you definitely need to have that in place. And then you cannot over communicate. There is no such thing as over communicating. True story. Got a call this morning. One of my directors is out in the western part of the state and said that they got a question from someone that said, I didn't know the state was in a procurement period right now for a student information system. And I think they about fainted. We think we've communicated. You can't over communicate. And before you roll anything out, test it. Don't put anything out there half-baked. You will set yourself behind so many years. Test, parallel test, and retest. Don't put it out there until you know it's right.
Those are great words of wisdom, Vanessa, and I would echo those. And what little I can say is that I think it takes. Don't be afraid to be that person to start the conversation, and to convene people together, and to be willing to be the person who is willing to send out the communication to all the other, to the other LEAs and schools and that around the state that we're thinking of doing this, to be able to bring people together. And in conversations with vendors, they're all very open to these kinds of things, but I think they have to understand that it's a process and that these things don't take a long time. And then I think going back, is working with having people work with their local legislative representatives in that to help them to understand the needs of schools in the local areas, particularly in those smaller areas, and why these kinds of things are important. To be able to help legislators understand that, yes, we can provide economies of scale that can save the state taxpayers lots and lots of money, but it does take a small investment to be able to make that happen. But the return on that will be far greater than if we didn't do it. And I think trying to be able to highlight that with the stories of how that's happened and the difference that has made.
I would add, remember your why, have a purpose, right? You're doing this for a reason. So what's the vision of why you're bringing this on and why you want something statewide? Remember who we serve, right? We help educators, families, and students. And I think if we can keep those at the peak of what we're doing, having those conversations with legislators, which are key partners in this work, and the sustainability of the work is going to be a little bit easier than done. I would also say too, reach out to friends in other states. I mean, I know when we started in Nevada, we reached out to Utah, to Michigan, to Florida, to actually North Carolina. We reached out. We said, hey, like, what do you know? What shouldn't we do? What should we do? Building our own professional network is going to be important in this. And so as states, right, we need to really think about how we can help each other and work together versus always working in isolation. Isolation never produces results. And so I would say definitely make sure that you do that. Cannot emphasize relationships. Make sure that you are talking to all of your partners within your state at all level, all the way down to the 5-year-old kiddo. Get all perspectives before we make final decisions. And if it doesn't work out the first month, it doesn't mean it's going to fail. It just means something was missed. And so think about that. It doesn't mean, right, throw the baby out with the bathwater. It means, what did we miss and how do we regroup, right? And so again, going back to what is your why? Why are you doing it? And then what are things that we need to add and change? We live in the world of technology. So we're all going to be always regrouping, reanalyzing every single year, because that's just the nature of the world that we live in now.
And I'll add, I'm going to echo everything that everybody has already said, but also making sure that your educators and your staff receive adequate training and support of those resources, because well-trained users are more likely to embrace what you're bringing to them and that sort of thing. But also I know states are grappling with this, and some states are doing are a little bit more ahead than other states, but really thinking about a continuous evaluation and feedback when it comes to how are you evaluating the effectiveness of the impact of those contracted resources on student outcomes, and how do you make adjustments? What's the process for making adjustments going forward? Collecting that data, looking at that data, and then how does it impact your future contracts? Or you might be exercising a clause that you have in your contract that allows you to maybe not have to use it anymore because you're not finding that it's providing any impact. So those are things to be thinking about.
Awesome. Well, I think in terms of communication and relationships, if folks are interested in learning more about this, you now have 4 ideas for wonderful resources in front of you for our wonderful panelists today. I'm happy to answer questions or support anyone who has follow-up thoughts on this webinar. You can reach me at amy@excelined.org, and I'm always happy to connect folks to the panelists as well. Thank you all for your time this morning. This was so interesting and something that really brings light to a topic that people may think they kind of know about, but you can apply it in a new and innovative way for these digital